We need to protect the ability of the press to engage in its First Amendment responsibilities.
I would say this, with regard to the potential prosecution of the press for the disclosure of material, that is not something that I've ever been involved in, heard of, or would think would be a wise policy.
All right. Policy is what he was saying. Welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show. Joining us right now is Andy McCarthy, best-selling author, of course, in his latest book, Spring Fever, The Illusion of Islamic Democracy, senior fellow at the National Review Institute, contributing editor at National Review, and former federal prosecutor as well. Hey, Andy.
Hey, Steve. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great now that I heard you and Steve Sharippa solve the world.
That was pretty cool.
It was.
Yeah, I mean, he's a cool guy. All right, so but you're cooler because you know we're talking about life and death issues, and Eric Holder, you just wrote a piece today at National Review Online in the I believe it was at the Corner, talking about Eric Holder, and it says Eric Holder misled Congress. Surely you jest, and you're going back to the Mark Rich pardon. To talk about how Eric Holder had previously misled Congress.
Yeah, I just think you reap what you sow at a certain point, Steve. You know, it came out during Holder's confirmation hearings that he claimed that the reason that he got himself bollocksed up in the Mark Rich scandal, remember that's the fugitive highly sought by the FBI who Clinton pardoned on the last day of his administration.
Right.
It was a really shocking and I think thoroughly corrupt pardons in that last process. Well, it turned out that, you know, Holder basically engineered that pardon. And when he was grilled about it, when Congress investigated it, he said that, you know, the big problem was I hadn't really informed myself about who Rich was and what a bad guy he was. And as I showed during his testimony, which he, you know, in his confirmation hearing testimony in 2009, he basically repeated that story. But in fact, when Holder had been the U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia back in 1995, his office actually had a suit against one of Mark Rich's companies, and Holder put out a press release when it got settled, basically bragging about you know, the way his office had handled this terrible guy, Mark Rich.
But this is the guy, Andy, you can't expect him just because a press release was issued in his name, just because he recused himself. You can't expect him to know when he recused himself. There's no record of when he recused himself. You can't expect to ask for that. You can't expect him to know what he's actually talking about or remember anything because he's Eric Holder.
Yeah, and we had the same thing come up, Steve, if you remember, with Fast and Furious about a year and a half ago, where, you know, Holder said that, you know, basically he had just found out about Fast and Furious a couple of weeks before he testified before Congress, and it turned out that, you know, a lot of people high up in the Justice Department knew all about it from the very beginning.
Yeah, no, all right, you know, that this is allowed, first of all, that this guy ever became Attorney General is one thing, and I know you were advocating very strongly against it at the time, and he's been a total disaster, but a disaster is one thing. Dishonesty and perjury is another. Do you believe, based on what you know, what you've heard him say, and in the cut we played, and you've heard it before that, obviously, and now the Justice...
And when every time it happens, it seems to conveniently... serve the person who gives the misleading testimony very well, at least if he can get people to fall for the last thing he said. So, you know, I would be very suspicious of that. And I would also point out that Holder could not survive 5 minutes under the standard that the Senate Judiciary Committee set for Alberto Gonzalez when they and the press drove Gonzalez out of town. And if you remember what that was, people like Chuck Schumer on the Senate Judiciary Committee said, in the end, it really didn't matter whether Gonzalez had given untruthful testimony, whether he had knowingly lied to the committee, because they got to the point where the information he gave them was so unreliable that even if he was honest but incompetent, that was enough for the committee to have lost confidence in him, and therefore that he needed to be replaced as Attorney General.
Yeah, well, of course, it all depends who's who's up there testifying and who's running the show. We're talking to Andy McCarthy here on the Steve Malzberg Show. And let's move on to another piece that you wrote the other day, and that was also at the corner, Islam's Parallel Emirate in the UK. Now, of course, we are all familiar by now with the horrific beheading of the off-duty British soldier, the copycat killing or attempted copycat killing in Paris, where they've now apprehended a recent Muslim convert.
No, you can't. A Muslim did it?
Yeah, I was shocked. I thought it was one of those radical Christian fundamentalists that are so dangerous that we keep hearing about. And then, of course, Barack Obama ignoring all of that, giving his speech last week. And of course, this all fits in. And but talk about the West, and talk about the problem that London and Great Britain is facing, that France is facing, and that we're going to face here.
Well, the problem is putting your head in the sand about what the ideology of the enemy is, and we saw that come to the fore yet again with President Obama's speech last week, where he actually came tantalizingly close to getting it right. He said that first of all, he called them jihadists, which was
I was shocked.
Remarkable.
Yep.
He's the guy who's basically purged that term from the government's lexicon. He counts on the press not to remind people of that.
Right.
But he also said that the threat against the United States was ideological, and it was an ideology held by Muslim extremists. So you think that he's heading in the right direction, and then he says, but the ideology is built on a lie, because they say their ideology induces them to be at war with us when everyone knows we're not at war with them. And of course, one thing doesn't have anything to do with the other. Their ideology does not put them at war with us because they think we're at war with them. It puts them at war with us because they understand, based on a literal, accurate reading of Quranic scripture and other sources of Islamic scripture, that they are divinely enjoined to make war on non-Muslims. And they consider us to be the biggest obstacle to that. And it doesn't matter to them whether we consider ourselves to be at war with them or not. The only way that matters to them is in how easy it will be to defeat us. But as I pointed out in the piece I wrote about this over the weekend, if you and I, if I come up to you as an aggressor and I punch you in the nose, we're in a fight. And if you don't fight me back, that doesn't mean that we weren't in a fight. It means you lost.
Right. Absolutely.
That's what's happening here. If you're not culturally confident, you don't think you deserve to win, and you don't defend yourself, that isn't not having a war. That's having a war that you lose.
No, absolutely right. We only got about a minute and a half left, but I do want you to touch on this voluntary apartheid.
Well, that's the Muslim Brotherhood strategy for taking over the West, which everybody giggles at when people like me say that, but they really do think that they're going to have conquest over the West, and they think, in fact, that history is on their side. And their strategy for doing it is to set up these enclaves in Europe, in the United States, where basically Muslims move in, they integrate but don't assimilate, and they demand that the host country allow them to live under Sharia law. And when those enclaves get big enough and robust enough and confident enough, you start to see the kind of forcible action we're seeing in Europe, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is very unfortunate, and you're just so right on target. And I want to just to mention one more time, Spring Fever, which is now out in paperback, Andy's great book, The Illusion of Islamic Democracy, and we'll have to do that next time. That whole Middle East, and every time I look over there, I just get more and more frightened about what's taking place. And when I look at Syria and McCain going over there and now wanting to arm the rebels, and we don't know who the rebels are, it's just it's crazy time. But Andy, thank you, my friend, as always, for your time, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you. Andy McCarthy, ladies and gentlemen.